Hello, and welcome to DM It All, the show where we discuss D&D books and tabletop gaming history. Take note of the tabletop gaming history part, as we like to dip our toes into other rule sets now and then. It not only provides some variety, but contextualizes other parts of the RPG market, something that D&D both influences and is influenced by. So today, we're covering one of D&D's more successful competitors, Star Wars. More specifically, the 1987 Star Wars RPG by West End Games. Considering the size and devotion of the Star Wars fanbase, it's not surprising that it went on to become one of the most profitable tabletop licenses. There were 3 completely different Star Wars RPGs released over the years, not counting the different additions and variations within each system. Despite the newer options, the original West End Games version still holds a special place in the hearts of many fans, to the point that Fantasy Flight Games, the creator of the most recent Star Wars RPG, reprinted it in honor of its 30th anniversary. West End Games as a company was founded in 1974 by Daniel Scott Palter. Palter worked for his family firm Bucci Imports, which sold Italian clothing and accessories. Palter, being a fan of wargaming, decided to use his income from Bucci Imports to fund his own wargaming company. He named the company after the bar where the founding was finalized, the West End Bar, near Columbia University in Manhattan. While the company was initially focused on board games, it later tried to squeeze into the growing RPG market. In 1983, Palter hired several new game designers, including Greg Costikyan, who had been working on wargames since the early 1970s. Costikyan's previous employer was Simulations Publications Incorporated, a company he worked for since he was 14. Despite starting off in SPI's warehouse division, Costikyan was promoted to the design staff over time. But SPI was shut down in 1982 when it was acquired by TSR, the original publisher for D&D. At that time, Costikyan was looking for someone to publish his Paranoia RPG, so he decided to pitch it to his new employer. Paranoia was a unique black comedy game set in a dystopian future, where players were encouraged to double-cross each other. It helped West End Games achieve their first critical success in the field of RPGs. Eventually, West End Games focused on acquiring valuable licenses for their tabletop properties. In 1986, West End published the Ghostbusters RPG, which was the first RPG to use what is now known as the D6 system. The design work was penned by the top talent of Chaosium, the publishers of Call of Cthulhu. Greg Costikyan aided in editing the Ghostbusters RPG, and went on to modify it to create the Star Wars RPG in 1987. Unlike D&D, which uses a variety of dice, the D6 system is played entirely with standard D6 dice. Stats were measured in dice quantity, allowing more experienced characters to roll more dice as they got stronger. For example, Wookiees started with a 5D in strength, meaning they got to roll 5d6 dice every time they flexed their physical prowess. Later editions of Star Wars added more complexity to this system, but the original game was intended to be fast and easy to play. Character creation was just about picking an existing character template like Smuggler or Bounty Hunter, and making a few customizations. However, more ambitious players could create their own unique templates. Templates decided a character's attributes, which include dexterity, strength, perception, knowledge, mechanical skill, and technical skill. These 6 stats determined the minimum a character could roll for a skill they had no training in. Although attributes stayed the same throughout a character's career, skills attached to those attributes could be later improved. Gear could likewise be improved, as specs like weapon damage and ship maneuverability were measured in dice amounts. So characters could add dice to their equipment, creating iconic items unique to their hero. The D6 combat was based on a wound system that progressed through 2 stages before a character was incapacitated. Characters could also bypass multiple wound stages if they botched a dice roll to absorb damage. Sometimes characters would suffer penalties, which reduced the dice they roll by 1 for particular actions. Stunned characters took a dice penalty for 1 round, while wounded characters kept the dice penalty until their wounds were treated. Characters could also voluntarily take a dice penalty in order to perform multiple actions in a single round. Each action after the first incurred an additive penalty, so a character looking to make 3 actions in a single round had to subtract 2 dice from each of their rolls. Combat itself was by and large fairly simple, though there were optional rules for miniature combat if players want something less abstract. Out in the vast depths of space, ship combat was broken down to 3 ranges: short, medium, and long distance. Characters would roll their vehicle's speed to close in on or escape from enemies, and then fire their weapons like normal. Jedi in this system were similar to D&D wizards, in that they were very complicated to play in comparison to the non-magic classes. Similarly, they started off weaker than everyone else, but eventually became the strongest party members over time, provided they survived the early game. They were also similar to old school paladins in that they followed a strict moral code in exchange for their powers. Failing to follow the Jedi code would penalize the player with a dark side point. The Game Master then rolled a d6 to see if said character fell to the dark side. If the character had more dark side points than the rolled amount, they were demoted to an NPC villain played by the Game Master. So this system encouraged players to be heroes rather than murder hobos. Non-Jedi could also get dark side points, but only by misusing a force point to do evil. Force points were a meta plot currency similar to inspiration points in modern D&D. Characters received 1 force point at the start of their adventure, and earned more for performing dramatically heroic actions. Characters could spend their force points to double their dice for 1 round, essentially trusting the force to get them through a tight spot. While the Star Wars RPG was being developed, a source book for the franchise was also being written. This book was authored by Bill Slavicsek, a West End Games editor hired in 1986. Slavicsek oversaw the West End Star Wars line for the first year until he became the editorial director of the company. He left West End Games in 1990, but continued to do freelance work for the company, as well as for TSR. That was until he started working for Wizards of the Coast in 1997. TSR and West End both went bankrupt around the same time, allowing Wizards of the Coast to simultaneously snatch up the rights to Dungeons & Dragons and Star Wars. Slavicsek worked on both properties, eventually rising to the Director of Research and Development for Wizards of the Coast, until finally leaving the company in 2011. During his career, Slavicsek became known as one of the biggest Star Wars experts, penning the 2nd and 3rd editions of the official Star Wars reference book. The West End Games sourcebooks themselves actually became official reference material, as they cataloged, detailed, and named many elements in the Star Wars universe for the first time. Although the Star Wars RPG is technically not the first product from the expanded universe, it marked the beginning of the EU's boom during the late 80s and early 90s. In an effort to coordinate their products better, Lucasfilm looked to the Star Wars tabletop game to inform much of the EU. In fact, when Timothy Zahn started writing the Thrawn trilogy of novels, he was given the Star Wars RPG as his lore bible. Slavicsek not only contributed to the franchise's lore, but also wrote some modules for the Star Wars RPG. Today, we'll be covering one of his adventures that was co-written with Daniel Greenberg. Greenberg was a prolific freelance designer that got himself through college by publishing his own custom D&D modules. He worked with several RPG companies over the years, but Greenberg's most consistent work was with White Wolf, the publishers behind Vampire: The Masquerade. The adventure we'll be covering is quite special, as it's not only the first module ever published for Star Wars, but, as many would argue, is one of the greatest. Today, we'll be embarking upon the Tatooine Manhunt. As usual, there will be spoilers in this module walkthrough. If you want to just skip ahead to our final thoughts, jump ahead to the time shown here. Take note that this adventure was made during the late 80s, when there wasn't much to Star Wars canon beyond the original trilogy of movies. In many of West End Games' modules, the player characters are simply rebels working against the evil Empire. Thus, Jedi were rare, and nowhere near as powerful as they're portrayed nowadays. Some of the info in this module pertaining to Star Wars canon is likely outdated, especially for the modern Disney continuity. The adventure begins with an odd staple of West End Games and their version of Star Wars, a scripted opening cinematic. Here, the Game Master narrates a cutaway scene that is structured like a movie script. Set within an Imperial Star Destroyer, a captured pirate is brought before an Imperial commander. The pirate is sentenced to death for his crimes against the Empire, but he has something to bargain with in exchange for his life. He claims to have important information on a man named Adar Talon. The player characters themselves aren't actually supposed to be aware that any of this is occurring, as this scene replicates how the films would occasionally cut to the villains to raise the stakes. Plus, it adds some color to the cruel commander behind this mission, as the party never actually encounters him. After this cutaway, the Game Master will pass out a literal script to set up the opening scene. Each player is assigned a different role, with the Game Master playing any NPCs that might be needed. While a bit unorthodox, these scripted elements were common in D6 Star Wars. They were meant to evoke a more cinematic tone, but never really caught on. The only bit of plot relevance here is that the party receives an emergency call from a rebel spy. This rebel spy has infiltrated an Imperial Star Destroyer currently docked for repairs. It's located on a space station near the less popular Outer Rim territories. The spy has an important message for the rebels, but will only deliver it in person inside the space station. When the party reaches the rendezvous point, they will find the spy's corpse lying before an Imperial officer. He is flanked by 2 bounty hunters, and the party will have to kill him before he summons reinforcements. In the distance will be a mysterious figure wearing Mandalorian armor that will glare at the party right before disappearing into an airlock. If you guessed that this was Boba Fett, you'd be wrong. This is Jodo Kast, a bounty hunter that has quite literally based his looks off of Boba Fett. See, the main draw of Tatooine Manhunt is to have the party fight a bunch of knockoff bounty hunters from The Empire Strikes Back. Like a lot of other 80s RPGs, West End games didn't really want players killing off established characters from lore, so whenever West End gave stats to characters like Boba Fett, they often made them excessively strong, dwarfing what they were originally capable of in the films. So adding store-brand Boba Fett in this adventure still gave players the opportunity to defeat Boba Fett while keeping the story in line with continuity. Ironically, Jodo Kast eventually made his way into other EU products, including a comic where he fought Boba Fett himself. Kast's brief cameo here is meant to build up hype for him being the big baddie. Teasing a villain can often be dangerous in tabletop games, because unless they're flat out broken, there's always a chance that the party lucks out and kills them. Kast will likely escape, however, thanks to his jetpack in close proximity to the Imperial Star Destroyer. Afterwards, if the party inspects the rebel spy's corpse, they'll discover that she was not killed by an Imperial blaster. Instead, protruding from her neck is a poisoned needle dart, which will become Kast's calling card for this adventure. On the body is also a datapad holding her final message. In it, she describes Adar Talon, the man mentioned during the opening cutaway. Talon was a famous commander and hero of the Old Republic until his apparent death, but in reality he had gone into hiding on the desert planet of Tatooine. Now that the Empire knows he is alive, they have sent numerous bounty hunters to scour the planet. Since the rebellion hopes to recruit Talon to their side, it is up to the party to save him. They have 5 days to rescue Talon before the Star Destroyer finishes its repairs and reaches Tatooine. Therefore, the party should depart immediately, especially because the Empire will soon lock down the station for 24 hours. During that time, stormtroopers will investigate every ship, looking for their Imperial officer's killer. The party will need a good cover story, or a good escape plan, to make it out alive. Once they reach Tatooine, the best place to start the investigation is the capital, Mos Eisley. But the party should be wary of docking in one of Mos Eisley's decrepit spaceports, as they'll have to bribe one of its prickly customs officers. Otherwise, he might search their ship and question their cover story. Although the Empire has a small presence on Tatooine, they can still impound the party's ship and brand them as outlaws. If the party is able to barter with the customs officer, he will hand over a map of Mos Eisley. This fold-out map is included with the adventure and gives the party free reign to go wherever they want. There are a total of 22 listed areas, including practical locations like hotels and stores. If the party is looking for something a little less traditional, they can peruse the wares of the scavenger Jawas. Other buildings exist largely for flavor, but the party can still use these locations to gather information about Adar Talon. First on the itinerary will probably be the Mos Eisley Cantina, famous for its music. As expected, the cantina features a wild variety of aliens, but it will also be crawling with bounty hunters. In fact, because of the Imperial bounty, most of Mos Eisley will be overrun with the money-loving mercenaries. The cantina keeps a sign-up office for new bounty hunters, run by a rodent-like alien named Puggles Trod. Puggles is working with Jodo Kast by organizing less skilled bounty hunters into groups, thereby keeping the hunters in line and out of Kast's way. While inside the cantina, the party can spend their time drinking, gambling, brawling, or wooing some of the locals. The most helpful patron of this establishment is an elderly woman who has gone slightly senile. She spends most of her time ranting about a Tusken Raider assault that happened years ago. If the party is friendly to her, she will tell them about a man named Labria. Labria is canonically the devil-like alien that briefly appears in the cantina during A New Hope. This module expands on his role by turning him into the town drunk. Still, he remains the most knowledgeable person in Mos Eisley. The party can search for Labria, but he'll keep his distance from them until he gets a better sense of their personalities. In the meantime, the party can explore the rest of the town. If they visit the speeder store, they'll be able to buy Luke Skywalker's old land speeder for 4,000 credits. It isn't that much better than a standard vehicle, but the buyer will be able to obnoxiously boast about owning the Luke Skywalker's land speeder. At the local power station, the party can ask some droids about Adar Talon. The droids will offer what they know, but in reality they've confused Adar Talon with a local moisture farmer named Bells Link. During this conversation, an assassin droid similar to IG-88 will enter the station in order to power itself up. This rogue droid is IG-72, a bot that has refused its termination orders and now seeks the death of all living beings. It aims to collect the bounty on Talon, but has concluded its target is easier to apprehend if he's dead. As soon as the players leave the power station, IG-72 will trash the place. It will then erroneously head for the farm owned by Bells Link. Aside from the listed locations, Mos Eisley also features scripted events that will occur at certain points during the adventure. Sometime during Day 2, the party will overhear a conversation about the death of a local man named Hef. Hef was one of the last Oldsters, the original group that helped settle Mos Eisley. According to this module, Mos Eisley was created after a colony ship crashed into Tatooine. The city was built around the ship's ruins, which can be found at the center of town. While the wreckage was visible in A New Hope, its backstory was created specifically for this adventure. Given that the Oldsters are likely to remember when Adar Talon arrived on the planet, and that they've been recently being picked off, the party would be wise to bargain with the NPCs to obtain more information about Hef. If they do so, they'll learn that he was the owner of the town's souvenir shop. At the shop, the party will meet his daughter, a rabbit-like alien with white fur and pink ears. This is likely an homage to Jackson, the Green Rabbit from the old Marvel Comics version of Star Wars. If the party is friendly, Hef's grieving daughter will explain that her father was killed by a poisoned dart to the neck, another sorry victim of the devilish Jodo cast. And speaking of devilish, the next major Mos Eisley event has the party meeting with Labria during the afternoon. If the party did not actively seek him out, they'll stumble upon him being attacked outside of the cantina. Random bounty hunters will be threatening his life in exchange for information. If the party helps him out, Labria will confess that he doesn't know Adar Talon, but has heard the name a lot recently. His employer, Slag Flats, has been curiously interested in this Talon fellow lately, Slag Flats being an Ithorian criminal that escaped to Tatooine to live in exile. Labria will offer to introduce the party to Slag at the outskirts of town. He'll direct the party to her location via his speeder bike, but is unwilling to physically enter the building himself. The home base of Slag Flats is a water silo that rests in the shadow of an abandoned transmission tower. If the party investigates the silo, they will find that Slag and her associates are dead, with an all too familiar dart protruding from her neck. The party can find a datapad on her corpse bearing an ominous message: Arno's next. The message refers to old Arno, a scout that is usually found out in the desert and coincidentally, the last Oldster left alive in Mos Eisley. However, in the midst of investigating Slag's body, the doors will slam shut and become magnetically sealed. The water silo will then begin pumping water into the building, ironically putting the party in danger of drowning in the middle of a desert. Their best hope is to reach the circular hole in the ceiling that the water is rushing out of. This trap was set up by some bounty hunters lurking nearby, and any party members that stay behind can capture these men as they attempt to flee. When the party heads back to their hotel room, the innkeeper will alert them that old Arno wants to meet at the cantina. Upon arriving there, Labria leads them straight into an ambush with, surprise surprise, a group of bounty hunters. It turns out that Labria has been working with Jodo Cast, and was the rat that betrayed Slag Flats, and now Cast wants whoever was supposed to rendezvous with Slag out of the picture. The fight in the cantina is led by Puggles Trod, but Cast shows up to fire a poison dart at a random party member before disappearing into the night. The other bounty hunters will likewise attempt to flee if their numbers are quickly diminished. Should the party hunt them down, they'll have to do so before the hunters reach Jabba's townhouse. Jabba the Hutt is the one that's providing shelter for Jodo Cast and his team. His townhouse is protected by some 24 guards, so it's recommended that the party avoids getting on Jabba's bad side. After the gunfight, the party will realize that Labria has escaped. For whatever reason, there is no way to prevent this from happening. On the plus side, old Arno will actually reveal himself and offer to help the party track down Adar Talon. He'll explain that Slag Flats aided Talon in disappearing on Tatooine, and she had been monitoring the party to gauge whether they were trustworthy. Before her death, Slag realized the party was Talon's best choice for survival, and so left some instructions for old Arno. Arno does not know the exact location Talon settled in, but he knows 3 real estate properties that were sold off around the time Talon supposedly died. One of these properties is likely to have been bought by the man, so Arno is willing to take the party to these locations via his cargo skiff. But first, Arno will suggest that the party rest for the night, which they should do to avoid getting fatigued. After a full day of work, fatigue can set in, forcing dice penalties upon characters until they find time to rest. In the morning, the party will awaken to a much quieter Mos Eisley. The bounty hunters have all left town before sunrise, realizing that their target was elsewhere, which means they now have a head start on the party. As the party heads out into the desert, the adventure becomes a lot more linear. For instance, there is no map provided for this section, as events occur in a preset order. The party can theoretically skip encounters, but it would take them miles off course and waste precious time they don't have. The first desert encounter features a group of bumbling bounty hunters on a sail barge. The sail barge is under attack by a trio of crate dragons, which are basically just dragons that burrow beneath the sands. If the party opts not to assist the bounty hunters and instead press onwards, they'll be attacked by a crate dragon of their own. After escaping from this encounter, Old Arno will direct them to their first destination, Seti Fisk's Desert Manor. The manor has long been abandoned and lies in disrepair. It now serves as a womp rat nest, whose inhabitants will attack in endless waves until the party runs away. As twilight falls, Old Arno will recommend the party rest at a nearby friendly town called the Oasis. It is run by the Dim Yu, a religion devoted to worshipping the Bantha. Since Banthas appear on many different planets, this religious sect views them as a sacred creature meant to greet travelers. Therefore, practitioners of the Dim Yu will try to be as equally welcoming to outsiders. The party will be greeted with food, drink, and music, but their merry festivities will get interrupted by a bounty hunter attack. These bounty hunters are directed by a woman named Zardra, who is part of Jodo Cat's elite group of bounty hunters. She's here to strong-arm the Dim Yu into telling her what she wants to know, unaware of the party's presence, which may prove to be a fatal mistake. After surviving the night, the party's next destination is the farm of Bel's Lank, the same Bel's Lank that IG-72 overheard was Adar Talon in the droid station. The party will see the aftermath of this misunderstanding as the entire moisture farm lies in ruins. As the party approaches the charred remains, they will become targets of sniper fire. The shooter is not IG-72, but a little girl hiding in the ruins. If the party manages to get close and disarm the sniper, she will tell them that a shiny man came and slaughtered her family. Old Arno will offer to bring the girl back to the Oasis, while giving the party directions to the final location, the Tusken Fort. As the name suggests, the compound is located in the Tusken Canyon, a place populated with Tusken Raiders, aka Sand People. These territorial raiders have already endured several violent bounty hunter attacks, so they're not exactly in the most hospitable of spirits. As the party traverses through the narrow canyon passages, the Tusken Raiders will trigger a bantha stampede. The party can try to drive through the herd, abandon their vehicle, or attempt to command the lead bantha. If the party manages to reach the end of the pass, they will be attacked by the Tusken Raiders themselves. If the raiders overwhelm the party, they will be captured and brought before the tribe to face judgment. Hopefully the party can avoid imprisonment, as up ahead is the Tusken Fort, the true home of Adar Talon. Barging in through the front door, we'll see the party attacked by Jungan, a lizardman look-alike to Bosk from The Empire Strikes Back. Jungan is not a bounty hunter, but rather one of Adar Talon's loyal guards. He will be quickly joined by Shrike, an insect-like alien similar to Zuckuss from the same movie. Shrike is the leader of the 8 soldiers that are currently working for Talon. He will try to defuse any conflict with the party, but will not hesitate to summon reinforcements if this situation escalates. Shrike's men will set their blasters to stun, and, by one way or another, escort the party to Talon. Should the party opt to sneak into the fort, they can explore it however they see fit. The fort is fully detailed with a map, complete with descriptions for the different rooms. Most of them will not end up mattering for gameplay purposes, but they add some believability to the environment. The fort is rather luxurious with 21 rooms in total, including a garden, a library, and an art room. There is even a servant's wing with 2 residents present, as well as a droid. In the hangar is a large land speeder and 4 starfighters. These are Z-95 Headhunters, the two-wing predecessor to the X-Wing. Adar Talon will be found in his music room, along with his wife and some mercenaries. He believes his unwelcome guests to be Imperial agents, and it's up to the party to convince him otherwise. Eventually, however, the conversation will be interrupted by Quist, one of Talon's mercenaries. Quist is an old friend of Talon, but has decided to switch sides. He will press a button on his armband and summon Jodo Kast and the other bounty hunters. If the party has already killed any members of Kast's elite team, they will be replaced by a generic bounty hunter here. The hunters will first try to disable Talon's men with surprisingly non-lethal means, and Talon's soldiers will quickly fall as they're little more than meat shields. The success of this module will hinge squarely on the player characters. Jodo Kast can be finally killed here, but Quist will stay out of the main conflict, instead taking Talon's wife as a hostage. If the party defeats the bounty hunters and parlays for her life, Adar Talon will be happy to join the rebellion. Inquiring into Talon's fake death years ago will have him explain how his days were numbered under Emperor Palpatine's rule. He wanted time to maneuver against the Empire, but didn't expect to fall in love while he was in hiding. Talon planned on retiring until he heard the news of the stormtroopers cracking down on Tatooine. He then understood that he would never be able to live outside the Empire's tyrannical reach. Thus, he began gathering his old crew to make one final stand against the Empire. The party will have to head back to Mos Eisley to recover their ship, but they can bring along Talon's starfighters. The starfighters can be used to make short work of any land encounters they might run into from this point onwards. When the party arrives in town, they will quickly learn that the Imperial militia has shut down the spaceport. It turns out the old thorn-in-the-side Labria has tipped off the militia to the party's identity, prompting stormtroopers to guard the entrance to the docking bay. Even if the party mows down these Imperial goons, they'll still have one last misbegotten psychopath to deal with, IG-72. The droid hides in the docking bay, but will join the firefight after 6 rounds. He will then start shooting any living thing that moves. Should IG-72 get subdued, he will initiate a self-destruct sequence in retaliation. The party will have to disable the program or fly away before it detonates. If the party escapes into orbit, they will have to hold their celebration as one last challenge awaits them. The Imperial Star Destroyer has arrived. Luckily, the Star Destroyer will probably be out of range at this point, but it has sent forth 3 TIE fighters to intercept the party. Adar Talon will suggest using his Z-95 Headhunters in the upcoming space battle. Space combat can be resolved with the RPG rules, or an official West End board game known as Star Warriors, a war game for those salivating for more complex space combat. If the party survives the conflict, they will be able to escape Tatooine's orbit and warp away. The final cutaway epilogue sees the Imperial commander standing breathless before Darth Vader, in more ways than one. It's clear why Tatooine Manhunt became a beloved adventure by most of the people that played it. Like a lot of great D&D modules of old, it serves as both an adventure module as well as a campaign aid. It features a fairly impressive Mos Eisley map that's integral for any custom campaign set in the city. While the second half of this adventure becomes fairly linear, the Mos Eisley portion almost feels like a sandbox adventure. The map helps alleviate one of the most common problems with Star Wars modules from this era, the heavy-handed, railroady nature. Linear adventures were becoming more common by the late 80s, even in D&D. Though D&D was releasing more restrictive adventures like the Dragonlance series, many of them continued to carry vestiges of D&D's original sandbox design. The Star Wars RPG, on the other hand, was focused from the ground up on creating a cinematic experience within an RPG framework. This was before it was common to have meta mechanics affect the progression of a plot. While the system did introduce force points, these were usually rare and saved for a big moment or two in each adventure. Outside of that, the Star Wars RPG relied on its adventure design to capture that filmic feel. But too many modules didn't bother providing decent alternative routes, acting more like a series of scripted events that were closer to a play than a game. This mentality is evidenced through the actual scripts that this module presents at several points. To modern players, the opening script reading will probably feel like a tacky experiment that never quite caught on. So while the Tatooine Manhunt still involves a lot of linear progression, it offers significantly more freedom than the adventures that followed it. At the very least, it provides enough useful material to create a more open homebrew adventure. As a story, Tatooine Manhunt has a strong sense of momentum thanks to its clear goal and reasonable time limit. But the real appeal behind this adventure is unquestionably the fan service. It features one of the most iconic Star Wars planets and puts the party into battles with beloved villains that one might argue the original trilogy underutilized, or at least some doppelgangers of those villains, for sticklers who want to have their continuity cake and eat it too. Plus, serving up a big plate of fan service isn't necessarily a bad thing. Mandalorian armor and assassin droids are more common in Star Wars media nowadays, but this was the first Star Wars module before the EU was really a thing. People wanted to see more of these elements, and this was their first opportunity to really do so. By sticking close to familiar Star Wars locations and characters, it allowed the adventure to feel like a living, breathing Star Wars experience. Tatooine Manhunt might play it safe, but in the process it delivered exactly what fans yearned for in a custom Star Wars story.